busy days to talk about this really important topic that impacts every one of our lives in this community and communities across the state. But we're concerned here with our little lovely part of the world here in San Luis Obispo, which is unfortunately plagued with the same problem that, like I said, that we have statewide. My name is Michelle Shoresman. I'm a city council member for the city of SLO. My pronouns are she, hers, but I'm really grateful to have so many friends and colleagues from both my county occupation at the public health department and my world at the city here today. This truly feels like a room full of very concerned and well-respected and important people fighting this fight in our community every day. So I'm really grateful to call most of you friends and neighbors. I'm going to start out today with a little bit of a shocking message. A few days ago, we received news that a homeless individual was found passed away in a little nook outside the San Luis Obispo City Hall. And probably a month and a half ago, maybe two, we received some concerned comments from a community member that had been walking in Laguna Park, recreating with their dog, I believe, and they found someone in extreme distress in the park, called 911, an emergency response, and that person soon perished at, I believe, at the hospital. So, and I've been doing this work with homelessness in my role at the County Public Health Department for about 10 years now, and I have unfortunately lost count of the number of stories that I've heard of our community members meeting these untimely demises in truly unfortunate circumstances that none of us would want our friends and family members to be experiencing. And so while it's shocking, I feel like it's a reality check to kind of open this conversation with the reality of what people are dealing with on a daily basis, and to kind of bring that to the forefront of our minds as we go into today's discussion. So the purpose of the forum today is to shed light on the complexities and constraints of this issue and what the city, county, and service providers are collectively doing to address it. This is a statewide housing and homelessness crisis. These challenges are ongoing, and we have so many needs. We've done a lot in this community, in the county and in the city of SLO, to address our housing issues, but we still have pretty significant gaps that we need to figure out how to address. We have issues with placements for medically fragile people, for people with severe mental illness. We desperately need more long-term assisted living for the homeless and aging population. We need more residential and even non-residential detox and drug treatment facilities. We just need more of all of it, and more types of housing along the entire housing spectrum. We in the city of SLO are very proud to have been one of the few cities so far to get a pro-housing designation, and we are working very hard on encouraging low-income, permanent supportive housing, shelter options along the spectrum, and we are so grateful to have so many of you helping again with that battle. To address homelessness in SLO, we've made housing and homelessness a strategic major city goal. We've written a homelessness response strategic plan that partners with the county's 5-year plan to address homelessness. We continue to dedicate significant resources. You see many members of our staff team here through our community action team. That's a program out of our police department, and then our fire department mobile crisis unit that works with these individuals on a day-to-day basis. But we've also just recently seen the point-in-time count numbers from probably many of you that helped with that effort to gather the data that happens every 2 years. And while the numbers improved within the county of San Luis Obispo, they did not, unfortunately, improve within the city of SLO. So we continue to have a lot of work to do. And we all need each other to do it. I was just telling someone earlier, talking in a side conversation, we are forced to collaborate. We're a collaborative community, so it works out well for us because we like to work with each other, but we are too constrained with resources. No one jurisdiction can handle this problem alone. We need to work together, and we depend on each other to help figure out and solve these problems. So we're going to do that today. We have a full program for you with a lot of experts that are here for a panel, and I'm going to turn it over to Daisy to get the action started.
Thank you, Councilmember Shoresman, and good morning, everyone. For those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, my name is Daisy Weiberg, and I serve as the Homelessness Response Manager for the City of San Luis Obispo. Just want to thank you all for carving out time in your day to be here for this important conversation, and we really do feel like this is just one of many ongoing conversations. Obviously, we won't be able to tackle every angle of this issue today, but just want to create space for more conversations like this. And when I look around the room, I see a lot of people that I am grateful to do this work alongside. I see engaged community members. I see our faith community leaders, and just really grateful for everyone that's in this room and kind of coming to the table, so to speak, and wanting to engage in these conversations. So just thank you for prioritizing being here today. I also want to start just by acknowledging and reiterating what Councilmember Shoresman said, that homelessness is a complex issue, and we really believe that both the challenges and the solutions will impact every part of our community, and they already are. No one in this room alone has the answer to solve or end homelessness, but there are significant steps that we're collectively taking to try and address it, and really want to also just continue having that dialogue around what the gaps are and what we need to continue doing to better address homelessness in our community. So to help provide context for today's conversation, I want to invite a few of our dedicated service providers and outreach workers who are the boots on the ground doing this work day in and day out to share a few brief stories. As a society, we have created many stereotypes about our unhoused neighbors that create a fairly wide gap between those with houses and those without. Nathan Rubinoff from CAPSLO, Margaret Shepard-Moore from TIMA, and Scott Gim from the city's mobile crisis unit will be sharing a few stories to help bridge that gap and demonstrate the complexities of the work that they do. But first, I would like to invite Shannon Del Porto from downtown SLO to share some of the priority concerns and issues that many of our downtown business owners, and I'm sure many of you in this room, are experiencing. We want to acknowledge that those concerns and issues are real and they're difficult. Every angle of this issue is challenging. So let's glimpse a few perspectives from Shannon, Nathan, Scott, and Margaret.
Thank you so much, Daisy. My name is Shannon Del Porto. I oversee the Clean and Safe program at Downtown SLO. So our Clean and Safe program includes 2 downtown ambassadors. We're a small but mighty team, and we're really working to make sure that downtown is clean, safe, and hospitable for not only our visitors, but our business community, as well as our local community as well. So we're doing a lot of different things. We're doing everything from litter removal, we're scraping the gum off the sidewalk, removing graffiti. We're also interacting with visitors, providing recommendations for where to shop, where to dine, making sure that downtown is a welcoming environment. We're also providing a level of outreach with our unhoused community, but we're really acting as the connectors. So we're building rapport, we're building trust with people. That could be anything from just saying hello and acknowledging our unhoused community, getting to know them on a personal basis so that once that trust is established, they're more likely to accept services. We also have a really wonderful partnership with CAPSLO, who I'll talk a little bit more about later. They provide direct case management downtown about 12 plus hours every week. It's been a really, really successful part of our program. We've seen a lot of really positive outcomes, which I'll let Nathan talk about in a little bit. From our business community's perspective, something that we see often is our unhoused folks sleeping in alcoves overnight, leaving behind garbage, personal belongings. Unfortunately, sometimes we're seeing feces, urine, vomit, all the unpleasant stuff that we don't really want to talk about, but that is a reality for our downtown community and our business owners. One example that comes to mind is we've had a business owner who they have a kind of a perfectly tucked little alcove. They've had a group of folks sleeping there overnight. They've politely asked them, hey, if you're going to sleep here, if you could at least remove the garbage, the belongings, all of the fun stuff, the not so fun stuff, because they're having to pick it up in the morning. Unfortunately, and this isn't always the case, but this particular group has been aggressive with these business owners. They've actually gone into the store, harassed the employees, and they have started lighting fires in their alcoves. That could be for a number of different reasons. This is not the case for every unhoused person in our community, but this is something that we're seeing more and more of, and it's a really big concern from the business owner's perspective and just for a safety perspective. Lighting fires in an alcove is not a safe environment. So we've been working really closely with CAPSLO and the police department. This particular business owner has a 602 no trespassing form on file. The police have increased patrol overnight, which has been helpful. And then our community service officers, our CSOs downtown, not sure if you've seen them, they are absolutely wonderful. They're downtown every single day, and they've been interfacing not only with our unhoused community, but with the business owners themselves. So it's been a really positive relationship. Again, we're just trying to be the connector, help support our unhoused folks by referring them to services. And the main way that we do that is through our team at CAPSLO. So with that, I would love to introduce Nathan Rubinoff from CAPSLO.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Rubinoff. I'm the Outreach and Engagement Supervisor for CAPSLO. My role includes supervising the Safe Parking Program at 40 Prado, encampment, street, and community outreach. Thank you, Shannon, for that introduction and for introducing some of the unique challenges that homelessness presents our downtown community. Service providers like myself are aware of the chronically homeless people who stay downtown, and they each have unique challenges and barriers that require substantial community effort to overcome. I'm here today to discuss an unusual story of success that highlights some of the challenges that providers face when helping people experiencing homelessness. So I'm going to refer to this client as John to protect his confidentiality. I first encountered John in June of 2022. He would disappear for weeks at a time and struggle to follow through on instructions. As I got to know John better, I realized that he suffers from severe memory issues that would later be diagnosed as dementia. John also suffers from incontinence, which is the dementia makes difficult to manage. For months, John would wander around downtown slow, seemingly lost, looking for food, often in soiled clothing. I tried numerous times to take him to 40 Prado Services Center for shelter, food, or a shower. More than 10 times doing this, John would forget where he was and wander back downtown. I took him to the Department of Social Services to sign up for CalFresh and general assistance. He lost at least 5 CalFresh cards, and I never saw him successfully use one. I take him to shower with the people, hoping the smaller individual units would help John, and finally helped him shower after several attempts, which was a big win at the time. John was always friendly despite his poor condition and obvious confusion. Many community members, including staff, city staff, downtown business owners, the Mobile Crisis Unit, Community Action Team, and the downtown ambassadors would help John by giving him food and contacting service providers for help. We were stuck in this limbo for over a year of trying to help John without being able to make any real success until Sarah from the city's homelessness response team took the step after repeated adult protective service reports, creating a multidisciplinary team meeting where several agencies came together to discuss how we could help John collaboratively as a community. Allison, nurse navigator with public health, enrolled him in case management, enhanced care case management, the SunCal Community Support Program, and helped John receive medical care and make it to appointments. Jason Carr from French Hospital provided valuable insight on navigating our medical system. Hayden and Scott from City Outreach helped locate and transport John. Melissa and Lauren from TIMA helped John get to doctor's appointments and completed a social security application with him. Diana with APS, Adult Protective Services, contacted John's family and was able to reach his brother, who was willing to serve as power of attorney. CHC Prado staff worked with John, helping him get last-minute appointments and working around his condition. Staff from the city's homelessness response team, downtown ambassadors Skylar and Jay, provided regular updates downtown, providing him with food, helping locate him for key appointments. Capsula staff helped coordinate all of these services, and over time, John has been able to find stability at 40 Prado Homeless Services Center, where he has essential support managing his medical needs and activities of daily living. So where we're at now, John is still experiencing homelessness and is staying in 40 Prado. While his social security application is pending, John does not have the income, even with his mental health insurance, to pay for a memory care facility. It may be 6 months to a year until John's social security application is approved, and he can receive the level of care he needs. It's an unfortunate reality of our system that it takes so many people, so many agencies to help one client reach a point of relative stability, only to wait for a federal program to be approved. So John is just one example of the complex challenges that service providers and clients face, and that success looks different for everyone. Scott, from the Mobile Crisis Unit, is going to share another story.
Good morning. Scott, I work with the State Mobile Crisis Unit and also service specialist. Really close. Okay. I came up here in July of 2022, and I lived in Orange County most of my life and worked in substance abuse and mental health for 33 years. So I thought I'd come up here and sort of plug myself into the work I've been doing most of my life. When I got here, I realized what I've been doing didn't really exist here in the framework that I was used to. So when I saw a job posted for a mobile crisis unit in the fire department, I thought, oh, that's a very novel approach to this problem that seems to exist everywhere. So I thought I would throw my hat in the ring and see what I could do with my time and effort and experience in the field, helping people in compromised life situations find their way out, find a better way to live their life. And in doing so, I realized that I had a lot of education to do, and a lot of conversations that I had, heated and spirited for sure, about what is done here and what needs to be done here. But with that said, there was a lot of people open to the context that I brought into view about that issue. And, through this process, the last 18, 19 months, I've come to realize that, there are a lot of people here that are passionate about helping out in this situation. A lot of people here that want to do good work and help people out of this situation that tends to get them, in a place where they feel like there's no way out. For a lot of us, we're a couple of paychecks away and got, medical condition away from being out of our house or out of where we live, find ourselves in a compromised position. And it's interesting to see what we can do to help out. With that in mind, I wanted to bring a story of an individual that I'd seen for months coming into work from the South, through 27. And I passed this gentleman who had been posted up on a wall with his shopping cart, all very nice and neat, seemingly well put together. And I saw him every morning when I came in. I saw him every afternoon when I went home. I thought to myself, I'm going to stop and see what's going on with this. And when I met with him, he was very kind and cordial and very respectful. And at the same time, he didn't want anything from me. And I thought, that's interesting. So I started asking around about this individual. And the first thing I heard is extremely resistant. I thought, okay, those are good. Those are fight words for me. So I plugged myself in and I started to see this guy 2-3 times a week for months. And I kind of, got to the point where I built some rapport with him, some trust. And through that process, I realized that basically he was scared. he had been attacked at the bus stop, knife, head, throat, some ice for a while. And the reason he was posted up out there, God and everybody, was because he was scared to death not to be seen. He didn't want to end up dead. And so he kept his stuff nice and neat and clean. He was very cordial. He didn't want to cause any problems. He wanted to be a good neighbor, but he also didn't want to be in a place with a lot of people he didn't trust them. And that's really where we get to. You know, when you're in a position where you're trying to survive one day to the next, trust is very, very limited commodity. And it's hard to get that trust. So while I'm out there sort of heading this approach where I assess, evaluate, refer, you know, my deal with him was, as I said, you know, we're going to talk for a while. I'm going to figure out what it is we can do for you. And, you know, trust me, when I bring somebody to talk to about HMIS or how you live somewhere, it'll be somebody that I trust, so you can trust them as well. It took about, I'd say, 8 months. Finally, he agreed. He wanted to talk to somebody. He got on that list. It was a collaborative effort, like Nathan pointed out here. A lot were involved in the process. Got him off that wall. He's housed. He's happy. He's in a different spot. I think that's one thing that I can point to when I drive in, drive home every day is I see that wall. And that lets you know that there's hope in this process. But it takes all of us. And it takes a different mindset and a different way of looking at these things. With that, I'm going to introduce Margaret Shepard, she's an LCSW. She runs the library outreach program in various libraries throughout the county.
What's on? Can you hear me? Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. I'd like to share with you my journey. It's one of recovery, resilience, and redemption. I stand before you not as an individual, but as a voice for those who are often silenced, marginalized, and forgotten, are homeless. You see, once upon a time, I was recognized as the top 20 under 40. I was in leadership class 15. I was active in Rotary on the Transitions Mental Health Board, spoke 3 languages, had a college degree, and I had friends and family that supported and loved me. But beneath the surface of success lurked a silent struggle, one that knows no boundaries. Beneath all of this was addiction, and addiction does not discriminate. It doesn't care about accolades or accomplishments. It thrives in the shadows of trauma, weaving its destructive web through lives regardless of background or privilege. Even with support, the journey to recovery in our county felt not just daunting, but utterly impossible. What I desperately needed didn't exist here, so I had to seek treatment outside of our county at Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara. And there, I was able to find recovery, along with a lot of other people from this county. It was this struggle and the barriers I faced, despite all I had going in my favor, that lit the fire in me to make change. If I, with all my resources and support, couldn't find recovery, how could people facing greater challenges be expected to navigate this system to the other side? It motivated me to pursue my master's of social work, the path that has led me here today, almost a decade later. And I can assure you that without my safety net and my private insurance, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have my family, my son, my job, my health, and I might not be alive. That's the fact of the matter. Yet despite this passage of time, the landscape remains largely unchanged. The doors of recovery are often closed or obscured, leaving those in need to suffer in cycles of shame, trauma, and despair. In our county, there is no medical detox available for women. And if you are Medi-Cal, there is no residential treatment, so you must recover on the streets. What does this look like for me when I meet with clients? I want you to picture this. An individual who is homeless, grappling with a fentanyl addiction and mental health symptoms, who is being trafficked and was brutally sexually assaulted at gunpoint. And this person The resources that they needed couldn't be found. They were asked by Drug and Alcohol Services to attend 3 meetings every week for a month in order to get residential treatment. In other words, they needed to recover on the streets, nearly impossible task when every day is struggle for survival. Then they landed at the Puff Psychiatric Health Facility on a psychiatric hold, where they stayed an extra week in hopes of getting that referral to the treatment they needed. But we're told we can't find a place for you that will accept you anywhere in the state of California. In walks the social worker from the library with Dr. Google, who finds a treatment center 200 miles away that can accept this human so desperate for recovery the very next day. But what about the rest? There's only one of me and I only work half time. Suffice to say, the unhoused individual, the journey of recovery is not just difficult, it's unrealistic. And it's not for lack of desire or effort, it's because the system is failing them. It's because the resources they need are either unavailable or inaccessible. I'm not here to point a finger. I'm just stating the facts I've witnessed over the past year and a half in my position and when I was seeking recovery. So why am I sharing this with you if it's not to point a finger? Because the faces of homelessness, addiction, mental health, and despair, they're not nameless, faceless statistics. They're our neighbors, our friends, our family. They're human beings. And maybe they were in Rotary. Maybe they were a dancer, a nurse, a mom, a sign language interpreter, someone who served our country. They deserve to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity and compassion. I almost didn't share my recovery story here today because sometimes this is seen as a deficit. People look at me differently, but it's not. I refuse to accept that narrative. Recovery from addiction is not a weakness, it's a superpower. I didn't bring my cake today, though. Recovering from addiction is a Thank you. Recovery from addiction is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. It's time to ensure that everybody, regardless of their circumstances, their housing status, or their insurance, has the opportunity to unleash that power and reclaim their lives. In the meantime, as we gather here today, let us remember that change begins with empathy and understanding. Let us challenge the stigma that dehumanizes and divides us. Because in the end, the measure of our society is not how we treat the privileged few. It's how we uplift the most vulnerable among us. And if you are a boots on the ground worker, I'd like you to raise your hand. Anybody who does outreach, I'd like you to look around and see those people and engage them in a conversation later. Because they're doing some hard work on the ground and they know what's going on. And their only motive is to help. Thank you.
Thank you all. I just want to reiterate that it's a privilege to work alongside of each of you and everyone else in this room that's doing this work. I really honor and value the work that you guys do. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories. As each of those stories demonstrated, homelessness and addressing homelessness is complex. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution to addressing homelessness, just as there isn't a one-size-fits-all. This is really touchy here. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to helping folks that are experiencing homelessness. And given the enormity of this topic, we're obviously, like I said earlier, not going to be able to cover all of your questions or all of the different angles. So we do have question cards, and I just wanted to highlight that early. Even if we aren't able to get to those during the panel discussion, if you have any questions, feedback, concerns that you want to let the city staff and our other partners know, please fill one of those cards out and we can make sure that we get back to you with the contact information you provide. And then I wanted to, before we get to our panel discussion, I wanted to share some kind of contextual information just to help set the stage for the panel discussion. So I'm going to start, as Councilmember Shorsman mentioned, the city adopted our strategic plan in March of 2023, along with our major city goal, which has been a major city goal for the last, I believe, about 10 years. The high-level goals of our strategic plan are to identify and amplify the strategies, projects, and programs that are working, and to continue developing resources and implementing new initiatives to address the gaps in our system, which, as our service providers share, there are several gaps, obviously, that we are still needing to address. This work is ongoing, and it's constantly evolving to meet the changing needs. But in the first year of implementation, we have made some significant strides. The city and People Self-Help Housing were awarded a $19.4 million Home Key Award, which will help us create 75 new permanent supportive housing units out of Motel 6 in SLO. We also worked with CAPSLO to expand the 40 Prado safe parking from 7 to 12 spaces, which may not sound like a lot, but that's the only safe parking countywide, and that is a really valuable service for our community members that are living out of their vehicles. Our homelessness response staff and community service officers did direct outreach to over 160 business owners, handing out our homeless resource pocket guides, which we have here today as well. And from July 1st to date, in this last year, our mobile crisis unit and community action team have helped reunify 84 individuals with their families or agencies. They've responded to over 100 dispatch calls for mental health or behavioral health crisis intervention, and they've made 168 mental health or substance abuse treatment referrals. So earlier this week, as Councilmember Shorsman highlighted as well, the county released the 2024 point-in-time count community report, which did show an overall drop in the number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness countywide and a rise in sheltered homelessness. The city of SLO, both our unsheltered and sheltered numbers increased in comparison to the 2022 count. However, we do want to note that the total number of homeless individuals counted decreased compared to 2013, which was, I believe, the first count in our city. And sheltered homelessness is at an all-time high in San Luis Obispo. So we are encouraged to see that more individuals are sheltered, but the rise in SLO's homelessness numbers confirms what we've been hearing from our community and what our teams are seeing in the field. What's clear is that our community needs to provide more services and housing options for those experiencing homelessness. When we look at the housing continuum in the city of SLO, each type of housing is vital for the entire system to be effective. From emergency shelters to safe parking to permanent supportive housing and on, they're all connected and they are all needed to effectively address homelessness. The city, county, and regional partners, many of whom are here today, are focused on not only sustaining existing shelter operations, but also developing new transitional and permanent supportive housing projects to build capacity and create throughput for our emergency shelters and street outreach efforts. We are leveraging federal and state funding opportunities like the Encampment Resolution Fund and Project Home Key to meet our localized needs. So 2 projects I want to highlight are the Welcome Home Village and Kiowakin Home Key. The Welcome Home Village is a county-led effort in partnership with Good Samaritan Shelter, Dignity Moves, and the city to address encampments along the Bob Jones Bike Trail and to develop a housing community with 34 interim supportive and 46 permanent supportive housing units. And as I mentioned earlier, the Kiowakin Home Key project is a collaboration between the city and People Self-Help Housing with funding and service support from the county, HASLO, 5 Cities Homeless Coalition, and the Ballet Co-Foundation. Both of those projects will provide much needed capacity for our housing continuum when they come online in the next year. There isn't one project that is going to solve homelessness, but a multi-pronged approach is needed to build a more robust continuum. If you have specific questions about the Home Key project or the Welcome Home Village, I would encourage you to visit with our service providers afterwards. So People Self-Help Housing is here, as well as Good Samaritan Shelter and county and city staff And we won't probably be able to go into depth on those 2 projects, but I know a lot of you will likely have questions. So please fill out a question card or visit with staff after the panel. And while I'm mentioning that, we also received several housing-related questions on specific topics around ADUs and trailer parks, zoning. We have city staff here from our housing team, so if you have any housing-specific questions that we don't get to during the panel, please visit with them afterwards as well. So not only are projects like the Welcome Home Village and Kaiwiki Home Key needed to expand our housing capacity and create throughput for our service providers, but current case law centers around the availability of shelter beds for cities to have the ability to enforce anti-camping ordinances. There are 2 cases I'd like to highlight, which many of you are likely already familiar with: Martin v. Boise and the City of Grants Pass v. Johnson. In Martin v. Boise, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that cities cannot criminally enforce anti-camping ordinances, which include sitting, sleeping, or lying on public property, if they cannot demonstrate that involuntarily unhoused individuals have alternative shelter or another lawful place to sleep. There is language from those cases that some argue means that a city may not enforce its ordinances unless it can demonstrate that it has enough shelter beds available in the city for their homeless population. However, what the actual holding says is that citing involuntarily unhoused individuals who have no lawful alternative to sleeping in public spaces is a violation of 8th Amendment protection against cruel and unusual punishment. The Grants Pass case expanded Boise by also prohibiting the city or cities from imposing fines for violations of such ordinances, if the fines could eventually lead to criminal prosecution. Together with Martin, this means that the city may continue to enforce against littering, encroaching into public right-of-way, smoking or drinking alcohol in public, but the city cannot enforce ordinances to the extent they prohibit the act of sleeping in public by someone without an alternative. The Supreme Court reviewed the Grants Pass case at a hearing in late April, and a decision is currently pending. Based on that Supreme Court decision, local governments will decide if and how to change policies, which is a process that could play out over many years. I am not the expert on this, even though I'm touching on this today, but our city attorney will be part of the panel discussion to provide more insight on the current legal landscape. But if you do have any legal questions or questions about case law, please, again, fill out a question card and we would be happy to follow up and direct you to resources for more information. But we just wanted to mention that and kind of help frame our conversation in terms of the piece that plays in how the city and other jurisdictions can address homelessness. So we've been talking a lot about homelessness response, but what does that actually mean and who is responsible for doing homelessness response work for the city? Much like how homelessness impacts every part of our community, homelessness response impacts every department at the city. The fire department's mobile crisis unit, which includes an outreach worker, Scott, and an EMT or paramedic, responds to calls for services for non-emergency mental health crises and reunification efforts. The MCU team also conducts proactive outreach in collaboration with local service providers, outreach teams, healthcare providers to connect individuals to services and treatment. The police department's community action team, which is also here today, is comprised of 2 outreach workers and 2 police officers who focus on proactive outreach, de-escalation and crisis intervention in collaboration with partner agencies to find alternatives to incarceration, including treatment and shelter referrals, family reunification, and mental health treatment. SLO PD also has 6 community service officers, 2 of which are here today, who respond to non-emergency calls for service and conduct proactive patrols and community outreach throughout the city of SLO and downtown SLO. The city's ranger services are also here today, and public works maintenance staff, I know Nick was here somewhere, address encampments and debris cleanup needs on public property. And our code enforcement and SLO PD teams address encampments on private property, including trespassing enforcement. So again, it's a wide array of city staff that have touch points with addressing homelessness, but the primary focus for our efforts is ultimately to connect unhoused individuals to needed services and shelter in partnership with our service providers. the different departments playing a role in addressing homelessness, the city developed a framework to streamline the process for conducting outreach and addressing encampments on city property. This framework is referred to as our camp standards, and they ensure that city staff are taking a consistent and compassionate approach when conducting outreach and addressing encampments that pose health and safety risks. The city's CAT and MCU teams connect unhoused individuals with shelter and services in collaboration with CAPSLO, TEMA, Good Samaritan Shelter, healthcare providers, and the county. Public Works and Ranger Services coordinate the cleaning of any trash and hazardous items and work to restore and maintain the city's public spaces. Our police and fire departments also work to prevent and address health and safety emergencies, especially with encampments that are located in high flood and fire risk areas like the Bob Jones Bike Trail. All of this is done in coordination with and consideration of the various jurisdictions within the city, ranging from city-owned property and open spaces to private property and Caltrans right-of-way. So now that we've provided some very high-level context for the city's homelessness response efforts, I'd like to zoom out a little further and provide framework for how the city, county, and local service providers engage and overlap on homeless services. The city's place in this framework is as a connector to the services and programs provided by the county and local housing and homeless services providers. The city doesn't receive dedicated ongoing funding for homeless services, and our county and service providers rely on state and federal funding as well as other grant opportunities to sustain ongoing homeless services programs and initiatives. As a community, we are facing a complex set of interrelated challenges when it comes to preventing and addressing homelessness. We've invited representatives from the city, county, and CAPSLO to join us today for a discussion about not only those challenges and constraints, but what is being done to address them. So with that, I would like to invite our panelists to come up for our homelessness response panel discussion. And I would like to introduce our moderator for today's panel, John Townsend. John is an engaged community member and a former Cal Poly faculty member. He served as the executive director of the Cal Poly Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and has an extensive background in entrepreneurial technology and business leadership. So I will hand it over. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Daisy. Okay, well, welcome everybody, and it's great to see such a robust audience here today, obviously indicative of how important of an issue this is in our community. And I am privileged to be able to moderate the panel discussion today. We have a lot to discuss. We did solicit questions from the community in advance and received quite a few. I congratulate you on not throwing us a bunch of softball questions. There are some pretty good singers in there. I think our panelists will be well prepared to answer those and respond to those. We did take the liberty of organizing the questions into kind of a conversational flow organized around 6 topical areas. So I think that'll make the conversation a little bit easier to follow and keep it flowing. I would also like to reiterate that if you have a question that is not to be asked or it was not submitted in advance, please fill out a card and drop it back in the basket in the back of the room. With your contact information, we'll make sure that we get a response out to each and every one of you. And Daisy's team will be working hard to make sure everybody gets their questions answered. As you can tell, with all the great information we've received this morning, this is a very complex problem, and it is a community problem. It's a challenge that we all share in the responsibility of addressing. And so one of the things I hope you take away from this panel discussion is not only to be a more informed citizen, but also to find a way that you feel that you can engage and be a part of the solution to the homelessness challenge that we have in the community. So with that, we're going to jump right in. So let's go ahead and have each of our panelists introduce themselves by name and title, and then to the extent that your agency or organization engages in homelessness in the community. So Lieutenant Schaefer, let's start with you.
Wonderful. I'm Lieutenant Aaron Schaefer, and I've been with the city for about 17 years. So I've been through and I've seen the city from 15 years ago to what it is today. And the law thing we're going to talk about today is the good job we're doing. You know, it may not seem like that, but I think you're going to hear a lot about that today. I currently oversee our day watch operations. So under that is the CSOs that are downtown, around the city. I also oversee our CAT team. As you saw from the photos, I sit on the homeless response team meetings on a bi-monthly basis. So super engaged in what's going on in our community and working with these great partners in order to solve some of our problems to a certain extent.
I am Frank Warren. I'm the Deputy Director for the county's Behavioral Health Department. I'm in my 30th year with the county and have had the opportunity to work on a lot of these issues through being the county's Mental Health Services Act coordinator up until this last year. That is now Prop 1. We'll talk about the changes that impacts so many of our services. We have in the Behavioral Health Department, we serve countywide. We have 12 mental health treatment sites. We have 9 substance use disorder treatment sites. We have about 20 contracted partners. We serve about 5,000 adults for mental health needs each year, and then another 3,000 for substance use disorder in any given year. So much of the work that we're doing right now is really focused on the issue that brings us all here together today, which is how to get our most vulnerable population into service, keep them engaged in service, and then find ways to stabilize throughout. I've had a great opportunity to work with some of those partners in developing our homeless outreach team through TEMA, as well as working with all of these new crisis units and mobile crisis expansion, which we're going to talk about too. So glad to have everyone here and looking forward to the discussion.
Hi, my name is Christine Dietrich. I am the city attorney for the city of San Luis Obispo, and I have been in that role since 2010 with the city for almost 20 years. In my role, I implement the council's direction, helping to draft policy ordinances, and also work with our teams to address the various impacts that they're seeing in the field and try to work from that angle. I'm also the city prosecutor, and so I interact with all of the folks that you see here as it relates to folks who are experiencing contacts with the criminal justice system. And I want to be clear, I don't prosecute real crime. I prosecute with what we would call sometimes quality of life crimes, right? So if we're talking about public smoking, open containers in public, the trespasses on public property, we have free protection ordinances, park protection ordinances. So those laws specific to the city, the violent crime is the district attorney's office, not the city attorney's office. And I just want to clarify that because I think sometimes there's some confusion there. In my role as city prosecutor, I bring a perspective of being raised by a psychiatric nurse case manager who for 35 years served indigent populations in that role, and grew up believing in the power of case management and the power of mutuality and accountability. And so in my role as prosecutor, our goal is not to land folks in jail. I think that is a uniquely unsuited tool to this particular problem, to the complexity of this problem. And so we have worked for years with our partners in the police department. Before we had a formal CAT team, we had officers that were downtown and trained and charged with crisis intervention and building those relationships. And to the extent that folks had criminal involvements, we were using that as an opportunity to try to connect people with services where they otherwise might not be ready or willing at the space that they're in on their own to do that. And so we've continued that. We've elevated that. The police department, the mobile crisis unit has certainly elevated our city resources to do that. Daisy and our rangers and our public works staff are incredible partners to help us understand. We have a very small office, but to help us understand what might be the right tool to bring to bear, the right resource connections to make through that criminal justice contact. And then we support and advise for legal compliance all the city council, all members of city staff that are engaged in the field. And I just want to really take a moment to acknowledge the extraordinary work that I have the privilege of being able to observe and sometimes support that's being done by our field staff and our community partners that you see represented here. So really appreciate those collaborations and look forward to this discussion. Thanks.
Good morning. Lauren Ramos, Community Services Program Director at Capslo. Born and raised in this community. And after 2 years of at the University of Cuesta College, I got out of here and had a 20-year professional career in various communities across the country, working with vulnerable populations, and moved back here 996 days ago in County. But I just love where we live and how amazing this place is. And coming back here, having worked in more robust systems, I was challenged in the beginning at how far we have to go as a community. But I was very, very encouraged coming back here to see so many compassionate people and the level of collaboration in this community. Those are the makings for something special to happen. I'm very, very excited to be here today, but also doing this work in a community that I love.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Linda Belch. I'm Deputy Director, Adult and Homeless Services with the Department of Social Services. I work with the department for a little over 20 years in a variety of roles. In my current role, my staff and I are responsible for adult protective services, in-home support services, in addition to overseeing the continuum of care for the Home Services Oversight Council, working on the county's 5-year plan to reduce homelessness, and working on a variety of affordable housing initiatives.
Okay, it's working. Good morning. My name is Todd Tuggle, the fire chief here in the city of SLO. Unlike Lauren, I was not born and raised here. I was fortunate enough to go to Cal Poly, left, and it took me 25 years to get back. So I don't remember the exact number of days, but I'm really, really glad to be here. So the fire department has an interesting role in the context of our discussion here today. We have 3 basic intersections with the unhoused community. We are obviously first responders for medical. So when unfortunate medical conditions descend to emergent conditions, we're the first responders that go out. We also, with the fire department, we chair the vegetation management committee within the city, which handles fuels management for open space as well as the creek beds, where we get a lot of open flame fires in our communities. And so we are in the process of developing a comprehensive plan across the city to manage fuels in the creek beds, which is that intersection of unhoused community that are honestly just trying to survive in many cases, the use of open flames in combustible environments. And then lastly, the fire department has the mobile crisis team, or mobile crisis unit, as you heard earlier today, and that's that direct outreach to the homeless community. So thank you for joining us here and for the opportunity for this discussion.
All right. Thank you all very much and appreciate you making time out of your day to serve on the panel today. So we do have quite a few questions. We're going to try to keep each of them to about 5 minutes. I will address each question to one or multiple of you, but if you have something that you would like to add into the discussion, please go ahead and add on to the response. But we will move fairly quickly here, so we'll try to keep it as succinct as possible. So let's start off with kind of an overhead question. I think everybody would acknowledge that there's a lot of myth and misinformation and lack of understanding about the homelessness challenge itself. I'll open it up to all of you, and whoever feels you want to respond, please jump in. What myth or misunderstanding would you like to shed light on in your role, and how can the community benefit from that information from you? So,
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Thanks for asking the question. There's a lot of myths that come to serving individuals experiencing homelessness. And one that I'd like to touch on is the myth that all of them are suffering from a mental illness or a substance use disorder. In reality, it's no more prevalent in that community than in the community at large. In 2021, SAMHSA released a study on the Americans who are experiencing mental illness and substance use disorder. And in that study, it's about 1 in 3. So there's 6 of us up here on the panel, so pick one person from each table. and that's your face. And so I think what happens often in our unsheltered community, especially, it's just more visible. There's a lack of access to resources. It's far easier to get treatment for your mental illness or your substance use disorder if you have support and you have somewhere to sleep every day.
I'll just add to that. Thank you for that, Linda. That is the secondary myth, which is that all people with mental illness are violent, or all people with mental illness are aggressive, and that's just not the case either. It's a sampling of people who are in both the community that identifies with mental illness and the community that doesn't. The same with addiction. Typically, we see that people with mental illness are more often the victims of crime. And so sometimes it's just dispelling the notion of who our neighbors are goes a long way in helping us find ways to get them the help and help them get the help that they could benefit from as well if they choose.
Thank you.
I'm not going to, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is the misinformation that homelessness is a police issue, right? I think we have a portion of it, but I think working with people that are on this panel and the people all on our teams that we have out in the field, that it takes a village to do this. And the police department is there for our part of it, but in the long-term sustainability of getting people housed, it is not a police issue. And I think sometimes we think it is, or sometimes the community wants us to solve most of those problems. There's a place for us. And I think working with our partners and having the resources that we have now with our CSOs and our CAT teams that are specialized in addressing these issues and potentially expanding that program over the next couple of years is going to benefit the community as well. And I think the other myth I want to come up is that, the police, all they do is arrest homeless people. I think the people that they call us, but we're going to work through the issue and work through the problem. All of our guys get CIT training. They've all been through a 40-hour class, or most of them, except for some of our newer officers. So they have the skills to work with the unhoused individual in order to find appropriate resources. Unfortunately, sometimes they are committing criminal acts and they have to be addressed and come up. And we've worked with our other partners to work to long-term solutions for some of these minor violations of smoking and drinking, and trying to get them incarcerated so we can trigger some of these services and have it funnel through so they can actually get housing or get in treatment. And sometimes that's what it takes, unfortunately. And it's worked. And with our CAT team to follow through and our case managers to work with those individuals that are coming out of our local county jail, to plug them into behavioral health, plug them in to CAP SLOW resources and so forth. So a lot of things are happening, and we're trying to explain all that today, but there's a lot of stuff happening inside the police department to address it without criminal behavior.
I think just building on what Linda and Aaron and everyone else has said, I just would like to start with busting the myth that any group of people, we talk about the homeless as though they are a monolith, and like any other group of human beings, they most certainly are not. And I think if we can start there, that there is a complexity, right? There is a complexity. No one of us is all good or all bad. We engage in good and bad conduct every day. And I think it is a mistake to suggest that this group is somehow different than the rest of us in that regard. And I think it would do us all a service if we could stop with the false binaries and begin to talk about the complexities of human beings, which are at the root of the complexities of this issue.
Thank you. Let me go on to the second question, too. Thank you very much for that. And Lieutenant Schaefer and Chief Tuggle, if I could direct this first question to you, and it's a multi-part question. How does the city propose distinguishing between the truly needy homeless and individuals who might be looking for a free ride at our expense? Does the city even agree that there are those two groups? How is the city going to address the aging homeless population, which is a significant portion, as I think some recent data has come out? So, Lieutenant Schaefer or Chief Tuggle?
Yeah, I think I'll take the first part of that. And I think there are more than two groups. I don't even want to count how many groups there might be, but yes, and we approach these groups differently, right? I mean, as different individuals have different needs. As the police department with our CAT team, and even if our patrol officers respond out to a call that may be working with somebody that's unhoused. We have to navigate the challenges that presents itself. But I'm going to tell you right now, when our guys are going out there, they're not just looking to write a ticket or get the person to get off a property potentially. They're having conversations or attempting to have conversations to understand, showing that compassion towards these individuals. That's definitely a change since when I first started, just to give you an idea of where law enforcement has come. But this doesn't exist 15, 20 years ago when I started. This is something that's been happening for the last decade, let's say, and working and identifying people that are taking advantage. I don't want to say taking advantage, because I think anybody who wants help and we give them the opportunity to reunite with family, or we set up housing for them to go back home or move in with a brother. We heard some stories earlier. That's money well spent if it's a chance, right? And so I think, even though the city, and we work with our partners to help, that the city's not necessarily taking a huge financial burden, but the long-term payoff of the resources that person may present to the police department or to the community, it's important for us to take that chance, especially if someone is willing. And I think that's the biggest part, because we have a bunch that aren't willing. And we work with those people too. And unfortunately, there's people that we talk to all the time. And I think Scott summed it up with that story of trust, right? The police department. And so luckily, as a police department with MCU, it is a great opportunity for the police department to like, hey, take a step back. And we can send the fire department, because we know everybody loves them. So when they see fire on there, they get a little more excited, instead of, ooh, if I don't listen to Officer so-and-so, if I don't do that, am I going to go to jail? There's that. It takes away the barrier of enforcement and getting the help that the person needs. And I think having MCU has been a huge addition to our outreach, preferably to do all those outreaches. And then, unfortunately, our role now in homeless response sometimes is to do the enforcement. But it's working, because we've had and Chief Tuggle can talk about this too, but huge success with MCU collaborating, with our CAT team in order to find successes. I'll let you tackle the second part.
Give me the dealing with the adult. I think the adult question. Is that what the second part was?
The second part, do we even recognize that there are those two groups?
Well, I'll stick with the first two groups, and I think I'd reframe the question as, when we get called out to assist, or we're outreaching, in other words, proactively outreaching. Scott talked about it earlier in developing a relationship. That the first thing we want to do is we want to interact with the person to find out who is it that we're talking to. And I think one of the challenges that we find with the unhoused population is perfectly exemplified in the story that Scott shared, is that when you have somebody who's been chronically unhoused, their view of themselves is often a reflection of how society views them. They've been viewed as invisible, sometimes inhuman, sometimes less than human. And so what's happened is, now that individual oftentimes has that themselves, and the first barrier to break through is to view them, is for them to view themselves in a humane fashion, for them to view themselves as a whole person. And so where it becomes challenging is that the first thing you can do to help somebody view themselves as a whole person is to hold them accountable. To hold them accountable to something. And to say that, we see you as a whole person, and so we're going to hold you accountable to the values that we bring to the table. So we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to say, we want to meet you tomorrow, and we're going to meet you tomorrow, and we expect you to be there. That is an empowering act. And we have time and time again seen how that can be an empowering act within the population we're dealing with. And so starting with that viewpoint of seeing something as a whole person, seeing something as human, oftentimes starts to get to what the real issues are at the table. Once that happens, we can start to work through the process. We can start to work through the needs of the individual. And then as you work through, accountability holds up to the fact that now we get to what Aaron was talking about, which is at the very end of the day, there may be an issue that needs to be resolved through an enforcement issue, but you work through that, you're treating somebody as a human being, having a conversation, as a human being to a human being. We're not looking down on somebody. We're treating somebody as less than human. And so that's where we find we can work through those issues. And so to say that there's this, like, either good or bad or somebody's freeloading off, that's not the conversation we're having. We're trying to meet somebody where they are at and help them see themselves as somebody who's a contributing member to society. And when they view themselves as that, oftentimes that's when we start to see the results, which are where can we get you to the place that you need help? What is the service that you need that's going to help you get to the best place? There are people that ultimately say no to all that and ultimately lie a finger at us. There's people that live in homes that do the same thing to us and ultimately there needs to be an enforcement issue there. So yes, we do eventually get to that point with some folks, but we don't start in there. And we ultimately get to a point by learning who they are and what they're about. Yeah, I would jump into Capsule oversees and operates 40 Prado Homeless Service Center. I want to reiterate, it's a homeless service center. There's multiple programs that happen there. We, over the last couple of years, have gone through an evolutionary process of lowering barriers to really engage people in. And that was a challenge. That was a challenge for us as a team, for some of the participants who'd been there and been using that service to see more people coming in. But one of the other changes we made was moving our shelter program that's under that umbrella of Fort Prado to a housing-focused shelter program, and really meeting people where they're at and meeting with them and saying, okay, you're going to have a shelter bed for 90 days now, and we're going to work on a plan to get you where you want to go. And if you were to come in today, you would see people that may look like they're doing absolutely nothing. But it may be their first night sleeping there, and they now have a chance to stop and breathe. And we meet with those folks ongoing. Our case managers do a fantastic job navigating them through the process of finding what's best for them. But sometimes that takes 60 days of nothing. Right? If you've been chronically homeless and you've been, on the streets and stressed out and just trying to stay alive, you might need 60 days just to breathe. And then sometimes what happens is health issues now pop up, so we have to deal with that in order to get them where they need to be. So it does may present initially as this person's they're just hanging out. They're just eating food. They're just sitting in the day room doing nothing. But that might be what they need at that given moment. And our team could tell stories all day about how at day 85, the person's now ready to work a plan. And we have to sit down and say, okay, what does this plan look like and how long is it going to take? For some folks, it's 30 days and they're out. But those individuals, we have to meet them exactly where they're at and help them get to where they want to go. And sometimes that presents as getting a free ride, but it's not. It's very strategic, and that's that relationship between the housing navigator and that person to kind of talk through what does that look like, and then communicate that with our team as well. To say, hey, this person just needs one more day to relax and let their brain turn off for a minute, and then we can start working on it.
Thanks, Lauren. Let me go with the next question and have you respond to this one as well, Lauren. So we've heard that this is a resource-intense challenge. Housing is one of the most critically short resources. Yet when housing options are sometimes offered to a person experiencing homelessness, they refuse. We've heard stories about how many interactions it really takes before the trust is built and somebody really feels like they're okay and confident that they can move into housing. But why do we offer so many housing options? Why would someone refuse it? And if they do, why wouldn't we just move on to the next one? And this is not my question. This is coming from the community. But why do people experiencing homeless reject housing options when they're so hard to come by?
Yeah, I think we've kind of heard some stories and we've talked around it. I think the number one thing is trauma. If I had to label something, it would be trauma. What people have experienced. I don't know. I have 4 young kids at home. They don't like sharing a bedroom. I mean, I think my kids are relatively normal, but it is challenging. I think people want housing. I know people want housing. We all want it our own way, and that's a human. I want my house to be my house, and so it is challenging when you one other thing that comes to mind to really illustrate trauma: if you've been trafficked and you've been conditioned to be up all night working, for lack of better terms, and you sleep during the day, offering night shelter not the best match. But that's generally when people sleep, so that's when we offer sheltering services. We work really hard to offer day beds and allow people to sleep during the day. We have folks that work at night and do that. And so I think it goes back to that whole meeting people where they're at. And yes, in this moment, they may not want it. And yes, they do give us the middle finger. But it comes down to, again, meeting them where they're at. I worked with a quick story. I worked with a young man who I had been told by my team before this, and this wasn't in this community, that he was, don't get him housing, he's going to fail. He's failed 4 times. We've gotten 4 apartments. It hasn't worked out. And when I sat down and met with him, he'd been sleeping outside for 8 years. He was comfortable sleeping outside. And I said to our team, I said, we're going to put a tent on the patio. And they looked at me like I had 12 heads. But it worked. Eventually, he remained in that apartment that we got him in because he slept on the patio and he used the restroom. And he slept on the patio and he used the kitchen. But again, he was comfortable in that situation. And so, the whole free will and free choice to who we want is part of why people reject housing.
Linda.
Yeah, I think just to add to what Lauren said, there's also an element of loneliness when you move into an apartment by yourself. I think we are all understanding that being unsheltered is unsafe. And in order to address that, a lot of our unsheltered community do develop deep connections with each other where they feel safe, they feel connected. Those are their people. So the thought of leaving your family can be really frightening, and especially if you're moving into a single residence where you're not going to have anybody to.
Okay, let me go ahead and move on to the next question. Many of the homeless we see on our streets and in the parks every day have been homeless for years. If they refuse services, will the city use California's new conservatorship laws to enforce or force them to accept services? And Frank, why don't we go ahead and start off with you on that?
Well, let me start by, I think what people might be referring to is a law that passed and started in January called SB 43 or Senate Bill 43. And what that does is it expands the designation of how a person can be put on an involuntary hold. So you're probably familiar with the term 5150. That is an involuntary hold traditionally for somebody who is either gravely disabled or a risk of harm to themselves or to others. And for the last 20 years, that has been designated for people with severe mental illness. This law expands that to include a person who might be gravely disabled because of a severe substance use issue or a co-occurring, meaning both a substance use and mental health issue. So that law started January 1st. The counties across California will slowly implement. We were one of the first 2 counties to implement on January 1st. Us and San Francisco County. The reason why we chose to launch is we're one of the few California counties who has already integrated its substance use disorder services within its behavioral health and continuum of crisis and outreach. We have a robust medicated assisted treatment program. We felt the time was right for us to jump in. One of the other reasons is because we know time and time again so many people are met in the field in crisis, but because they only present with a substance use disorder, people who are certified to write holds didn't really have anything they could do at that point in time. What this means for us is that people can now get to our crisis stabilization unit. They can get to our inpatient unit. They can get to, in a few weeks, our new sobering center, which we're very excited about. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about as well. So there's new opportunities to engage people who I think for many, many years were passed by or not given an opportunity to get engaged in treatment. So we think that's a good thing. There is a really high bar for conservatorship. So conservatorship does not mean you broke a law and we get to, put you in an inpatient unit. That's not what conservatorship is. But this does expand the definition. And so at this point in time, we are not seeing people at large numbers going into traditional conservatorship. We've had 69 holds written since January 1st. 8 of those were for gravely disabled because of substance use. Another 21 were for co-occurring disorder. And most of those individuals are now engaged in treatment or follow-up because we could get them from the field to services. So we're trying to take the positive on this law, but we haven't moved it towards mass conservatorship by any means.
Those numbers that you shared with us, is that an increase over prior
That's
periods?
countywide, and it is an increase, but now the distinction is new. So where in the past we only knew how many people were put on a 5150 hold, we now are measuring how many of those are because of a severe substance use. Again, this is not just drunk in public, right? This is somebody who is gravely disabled, unable to care for themselves because of the substance use. And so that's, the tracking is just different. So we don't have a comparative yet. That's the first 4 months, but we'll be continuing to track and see how it goes.
Thank you.
Thanks. And there's a reason that John started with Frank, because the question was posed as, is the city going to utilize this new conservatorship or this enhanced conservatorship tool? And the city does not employ the clinical assessment staff, does not manage the conservatorship process. Those are all services that are managed through the county. And so I want to make that, I know most people who are just experiencing impacts in the community don't care which jurisdiction's responsibility it is. You just want to see it fixed. And I guess what I want to communicate to you is we get that, and we are all here together at this table because we get that, and because we know that it doesn't matter whose jurisdiction it is to the person who's experiencing homelessness and crisis and trauma, and it doesn't matter to the community members and the business community that's being impacted by the adverse behavior sometimes associated with that. So Frank has addressed the county piece, where I can tell you that the city we are certainly working with the county to understand how our resources that we do have within the city can connect and coordinate and collaborate with those county service providers. My office in particular, as it relates to the criminal justice involvement, we have been on an ongoing basis for the last several months meeting with Frank and Linda and justice services staff at the county to try to coordinate where our police officers are making contacts with some of our most chronic folks that have chronic criminal involvements at the city level, and where we have this revolving door of prosecution. How can we do this better? So what we have initially agreed to do is that the police department is coordinating warrant execution operations. So the folks that are just racking up citation after citation, not appearing in court, have warrants issued. It's a revolving door with court, with the hospitals, with the county, with the police department, not an efficient or effective use of resources. And so what we're trying to do is consolidate those enforcement efforts focused on the folks who have the most chronic reoffense records and who have not reached a point because of the reasons articulated by Margaret and by Scott and by Nathan to be ready to proactively access those services and get them into court. The goal is into a single court where there is a judge who will hold them accountable, and there are service providers and justice partners available to coordinate right then and there in the court to accomplish that. So those are the things we're working on together. But again, there is a different role for the city and the county. And to Daisy's original point, none of us is going to do it alone. It's going to take all of us collaborating and rowing in the same direction on this.
Thanks, Christine. Chief Tuggle, let me address this issue to you to begin with. The topic of the opioid crisis. What are you seeing and hearing in the field amongst our homeless community with this crisis?
Well, it's a cyclical issue, and I think that Lieutenant Schaefer can add a little more context to it from the specifics about which drugs it is at this particular moment. The one you hear most about is fentanyl, and it's dangerous. It will kill you, and it kills folks daily. But it's not just the opioids. It's we were talking a couple weeks ago. It was methamphetamines 20 years ago. You go back far enough, it was barbiturates. But now we're into ever increasing intensities of the drugs that we're seeing. Fentanyl being a really dangerous one right now, but we're starting to see some other things mixed in there. Xylazine, which is a horse tranquilizer that's being used. So these are significant threats, and within the homeless community, we are seeing those impacts, which ultimately our first responders are going out to. We do have Narcan, as many of you are probably aware, that we can use. Unfortunately, Narcan is becoming less and less effective because of the intensity of the drugs, such as fentanyl. These are synthetic drugs, and they are extremely potent in their capabilities. And it's impacting the homeless community. It's impacting the housed community, and oftentimes creating unhoused situations for folks. So it is a significant issue.
Frank, what do you see at the county level?
Well, I appreciate that, Chief Tuggle. I think where we'll start is just so people have an understanding of this beautiful town I grew up into. The reality is opioid overdose has been worse here than most counties in California. We saw a quadrupling of overdose-related deaths between 2018 and 2023. 88% of those deaths in 2023 were fentanyl involved. That we know about, right? So that's a daily for us in this world. It impacts, Chief Tuggle said very clearly, it impacts our very vulnerable populations. And it even impacts those with families and stability, jobs, co-workers, neighbors. It's real. So what are we doing? We are increasing every opportunity we can to, if Narcan is not enough, we're doubling up our Narcan distribution. We're testing for Xylazine, which is another drug that we're starting to see more and more involved with overdose death. We are trying to stay on top of an issue that, like meth was 20 years ago, we had to get in front of in order to battle. And so that's where we are as a state. It's not just this county, but our county does have a significant issue. We also have a more pronounced suicide rate than many counties in California. And a lot of people don't realize that. Sometimes that's related, other times it's not. But our job is to really talk about it openly so that we can be honest and try to come up with solutions. I will say this, our staff are very committed to this reduction of opioid-related emergencies and opioid-related addiction. Our medicated assisted treatment program has expanded. We will continue to expand because we do know that treatment works. The key, though, is engagement, and it's regular engagement. It's not once a month. It is getting people in, and then that becomes very difficult if they are in the field. And so we know that housing matters, and so all of it's related to tackle this problem. But we can't just not do something because we don't have all the resources. We got to try everything we can.
Thank you, Frank. Lauren?
Yeah, I would just say on a day-to-day basis, we're at 40 Prado a substance-free zone. It doesn't mean people there aren't struggling with using substances. We're going to be one of those. We have recently added in Narcan distribution to our guests in training, providing information to them to say, here is Narcan, you can take it with you. We also provide fentanyl testing strips for those folks who are going to use. Most people don't want to die when they're using substances. They just want to escape reality for various other reasons. We're trying to support people again right where they're at. We have seen an increase of folks coming in and turning stuff in. We have a partnership to be able to dispose of those things, but it is an increasing concern. The Narcan not working is a real thing. With the strength of what people are using, personal experience is three doses to one person to get them to come back. So it's a scary thing, but it's part of the reality of working with folks. Thanks.
We spoke earlier, Shannon did, on some of the impact on downtown SLO and some of the response that we've taken, which have had significant and material effects in a positive way. But as citizens, either a downtown business owner, operator, or someone out in the community, how do we know who to call if there's a particular incident that we are faced with? And Lieutenant Schaefer, let's start with you.
On the fentanyl is what's crazy in law enforcement is that people that are addicted to opioids are now seeking fentanyl. They're asking for it, which creates a whole separate issue going forward, that it's out there and it's going to be here for a little while. And how do we combat that? So we have our special enforcement team that's doing a lot of research on how to address that problem, given that everybody's asking for it and heroin isn't around anymore. Haven't seen it in probably 3 to 4 years since fentanyl's been on around town. But to address, by most of you guys are here, the downtown component of, I don't know, I was just down there yesterday and I'm like, man, it looks pretty good right now, right? It goes in cycles, does it not? As far as, getting people into, we have a couple of our familiar faces that are down there that, with Christine referred to earlier, is working with the courts and working with city attorney's office and getting guys, and I said this earlier, but getting people into the criminal justice system can be a good thing. For instance, one of our common downtown, he had probably 70 arrests, and he would go to jail and get kicked out, go to jail, get kicked out, right? Get a ticket, right? That doesn't solve our downtown problem when this guy is constantly down there 24/7. He's now been in custody for 4 months, and we're hoping as he gets closer to his court dates, we can work with our partners as he gets released in order to get him into some housing or at least some programs that will allow him to be not in our downtown area. That's a lot of work for the police department and the city attorney's office for an ongoing problem. Well, we have a dozen of those people downtown. And unfortunately, a lot of them have what Frank was referring to as they have mental health issues and they have an alcohol addiction. And those can be challenging and difficult to work through. And to avoid just writing tickets, unfortunately, some of this has to happen. And we need your guys' help, because if we don't know about it, we have our CSOs down there 7 days a week, 2 of them. They're doing a lot of this work that's helping clean up downtown. Now we have our CAT team and we have our nighttime bike officers as well doing the same work. But the most effective group has been those CSOs to really every day they're interacting with them, not always in a criminal manner, but constantly. They think more about them than they probably do about some of their family members, right? So they understand where they're at and try to come up with a resolution. Several of them don't want to. I've been down there talking to some of our. One person comes to mind. I asked them, I'm like, hey, why don't you just go get housing? You have all this money that he's getting for SSI or whatever his funding is coming through, and he's just like, I love being outside. Kind of going with what Lauren said. I just love being outside. Why would I want to go sit in a room with 4 walls, no TV? I got to pay for cable. Like, it's a real thing. Like he just loves being downtown, and he's the next one that's going to have to end up going through this process. Unfortunately, he has medical concerns, and we're navigating that, and then with jails. So as you can see, as I continue to ramble on, it is a challenging thing that it's not an easy fix, even for the police department, even if we're out there doing enforcement.
it is a long-term plan, especially with Prop 47 and all these propositions that reduce the penalties for a lot of these, misdemeanor criminal acts, if you will. And I think part of that too is just train our staff to how to work through the challenges that when the criminal justice system provides, and the mental health side of it, and the alcohol addiction, and educating them on how to approach people with compassion and work with them and work with what their desires are. And unfortunately, like I said, this guy that I was referring to earlier has been in our community for 23 years and has been homeless for 23 years and doesn't want help, right? Yeah, I can go on forever, but we may not get to all the questions if I do.
Yeah, we're already going to be
I'll be here
starting.
after.
Aaron will be happy to talk with you afterwards.
Yeah, because I have a lot more.
The one thing I wanted to say, just adding on that, is we do not expect our citizens, residents, business owners, visitors to determine whether or not behavior is criminal. It turns out we hire professionals to do that. And so please feel empowered to call them. If you feel threatened, if you feel that somebody is engaging in behaviors that make you feel threatened, that you believe are a threat to the person who is exhibiting those behaviors, that they need assessment, please, please, please call. If it truly feels threatening, call 911. Don't feel embarrassed. Don't feel reluctant to call a professional. It's not your job as citizens to intervene and try to assess, but we do need your partnership to identify when those things are happening. We can't have a downtown officer or a CSO or an MCU or CAT team everywhere at all times. So we rely on our partnerships with this community to help us get to the places where you are experiencing things that you just don't feel are right. If you don't think it's an emergency, we have a non-emergency dispatch number for the police department. They will deploy the appropriate resources, but please, please call us. Please tell us what's going on. Please be our partners and our eyes and ears, and please don't feel embarrassed about making that call. If you're wrong, I'd rather err on that side and have somebody come out and say we're taking care of it in a different way, not a criminal justice problem. But they're going to be that hub through which we can access and deploy the appropriate resource. So please partner with us on that.
Thanks, Christine. And I believe we have a resource guide that is on the table in the back of the room. So please pick one up if you haven't already, and that will give you some additional information. We're going to be a little cramped for time here as we get down to our final few questions. So I'm going to skip around just a little bit. We've had a number of statistics from the most recent county and city point-in-time count shared with us today, where we saw the overall count at the county go down, yet the city went up. How do we interpret those results? Linda, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking. I am happy to talk about the count all day. Carrie over there should be at our resource table. Raise your hand, Carrie. If you don't know her, you want to know her. She is happy to answer all of your questions. But in response to this one, I want to really emphasize that the pink count is one single night. It's not a complete picture of homelessness in our community. We have an HMIS, Homeless Management Information System, that we need to use to look at kind of a balanced assessment of where are people receiving services. So at one single point in time, individuals were in the city of San Luis Obispo. That doesn't mean that's where they slept that night. It might have just been where they came to get breakfast that morning. So I think that that's an important reframe. And also just countywide having the reduction is a really positive sign of kind of a growing system of care where maybe we're able to identify our community who is experiencing unsheltered homelessness a little bit better.
Thank you. Anybody else want to? Okay. Let's move on to the next question. There's a perception that if we build housing, that we're just creating an incentive for more people to come into our county and our city and take advantage of that housing. What's the reality of that perception, and what do we do to make sure that that does not happen? And Lauren, why don't we go ahead and start with you on that one?
Yeah, housing, as Daisy mentioned earlier, is kind of the spectrum of housing, right? So if we're talking about emergency shelter, there is some truth that if you build a shelter, people are going to come sleep there. That's the point of the emergency shelter. But there's limited resources currently in our community. For a very concrete example, Fort Prado has a shelter program. We see about 10 to 15% of our folks coming from the coast. So Morbe, Las Osos is where they were previously homeless. There's no shelter there. So their option is us or sleep on the streets in that region. But I think overall, if you look across the state, look across the county, look at any city, there's needs for housing across the board. We're in a housing crisis as much as we are in a homelessness crisis. And so we need all aspects of housing to be built, whether it be permanent supportive housing, and we need all types of permanent supportive housing. We need to go a little bit deeper on that as a community. And then, even just market rate housing. If you are here as a Cal Poly student, it's tough to find housing. But, we had someone in our safe parking program who was a Cal Poly student and would be here for Tuesday, Thursday classes and stay in safe parking because they couldn't afford to be here, and then they drive back to LA to live at home. It just was the reality of our housing market here. So we don't have enough housing for the people that are here right now, let alone attract more.
Okay.
And I just also want to share some data from our pit count. One of the things that I think is important is we did ask individuals we surveyed who were unsheltered, where did they live? What county? How long had they been in San Luis Obispo County? 75% had been here 5 years or longer. 88% had been here 1 year or longer. And so I think it's important to recognize that people experiencing homelessness are our neighbors. These are people who have lived here. They are members of our community. They're not coming from outside of this community to obtain services here.
Yeah, Christine.
I just want to add that I think if you build it, they will come narrative. I have heard it for the full 20 years that I've been with the city. And I think that we have to acknowledge realities, as Lauren said. I also think we need to look at what has been implemented and how that has worked, and look at the reality on the flip side of, if you don't build it, people will be unhoused and they will remain in your community, and they will continue to experience trauma and insecurity that drives adverse behaviors that adversely impact your homes, your businesses, your downtown areas. And that's the reality. And so I think that we get caught in this fear loop, and I think that's very human. Like, I don't want to do something because I'm afraid of what's going to happen. What we've been doing historically over the last 50 years since we deinstitutionalized with no plan B hasn't worked. It is what has led us to be here. And if we are going to have to make some bold, fearless choices together, collaboratively as a community, to make this work, and I think we can look to Cabins for Change in the Grover area. I think we can look at the Motel 6 project in the Paso area. When we think about what am I afraid of with these projects, we can look at the Dignity Moves projects in Santa Barbara, a community that experienced those same fears and that same reticence and that same apprehension about who will be coming here and what will that mean to my quality of life and what I experience. We're going to have to overcome these fears, because what I hear from downtown businesses, what I hear from visitors periodically about the adverse impacts of the behaviors they're experiencing is scary, and it will continue if we do nothing.
Thank you. Okay, we have a couple more questions, and I do want to remind everybody two things. One, if your question did not get asked, you can go ahead and submit one, and we'll get back to you. Also, we have at the end of the forum the adjoining room where all the service providers, including representatives from each of the organizations and agencies up front here, will be around for more questions and answers. So please stick around and ask those questions if need be. So I'm going to open these last two up to everybody. Is there an acceptable level of homelessness? We hear this term functional zero. You hear of other cities like Houston that says we've solved the problem. We do not have a homeless population. Is that real? And then how specifically would you apply that to our specific community? Chief Tuggle, I see your microphone in hand.
Well, I mentioned it earlier, and I think that being unhoused is dangerous. It's bad for health. We're seeing it day in and day out. Councilmember Shoresman brought the story up just 2 days ago. A very similar story from about 6 weeks ago. To have a tolerance for folks living in those conditions, in my opinion, is not acceptable. I think we as a society, we as a community, need to ask much more. We need to demand much more. And, this is just my personal theme. I'll take my badge off for a quick second. But the homeless situation in our communities at large in the last 15 years has gotten significantly worse since the Great Recession. We've gotten to a point where it's almost become we're comfortable looking the other way. And I think we've become normalized to the fact that there's homeless people living in our communities, living on the streets in our communities. And to the question, is there a level of tolerance? I think the answer we need to go for is no. I think we need to get to a point where we find roofs over which or under which people can reside. So how do we get there? That's a whole other ball of wax, but I want to interject one other little piece into that. What you're seeing here today with this group that's here is a collaboration or a coming together of literally every form of organization you can get. You have city, you have county, you have nonprofits, you have for-profits, you have community groups. Every group that you can think of, every way that you can organize people is here today because they have a role to play in addressing homelessness and bringing it down to zero. We have never had a problem with that. We have never faced a problem as a society quite like this one. And so here we are 15, 16 years into this homeless crisis that we're seeing, and we're trying to figure this out. We are literally here up in front of you. You're watching this happen before you, and we need your help. We are being called to action. We sat in our prep meetings for this, realizing that we are calling ourselves to come together in a way we have not currently figured it out. We have not been in such collaboration as we are today. Every case, every story you heard today, individuals that have achieved success, have been involved with multiple providers, not from the city necessarily, but from the city, CAPSLO, from licensed clinical social workers, from the county, from 4 or 5 agencies within the county itself. And so it literally can take a dozen agencies, a dozen interactions to get somebody out of the homeless situation they're in. I think David's story perfectly captures the challenge that we are having, which is working with individuals and collaborating with ourselves. So to answer your question in the short, I think we need to expect zero. We at least need to strive for that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. There is no level that's acceptable. At the end of the day, the person that slept outside last night is someone's brother, sister, mother, father. They're someone. They are a human being. And I get the opportunity to speak to a lot of different people, and we all have some sort of reaction when we do see someone that is homeless. But in those conversations I get to have, when you really dig down, it hurts. It hurts each of us to see someone that is experiencing homelessness. It is kind of, we're taking on their trauma. It's that secondary trauma. We see what they're going through. Now, we all don't react that way right away. I went out to breakfast with my wife on Memorial Day, and one of our participants was standing right outside the restaurant and said, "Can we join you for breakfast?" I said, "Sure, come on." My wife didn't think that was great. She wanted to have some time with us, but because it hurt her to see that person in that experience. And so the very short answer was no, but it is a we just gotta love our brothers and sisters and do that in the best way possible.
Thank you.
Let me wrap up with a question for all of you to answer. So we've discussed a lot today, and again, appreciate everybody being here and engaging in helping us solve this issue. It can sound and feel insurmountable, and I'm sure that there are days in each of your lives that it feels like it's only getting worse, it's not getting better. What gives you hope that we're going to be able to solve this issue and we're going to be able to really create the community for every member of the community that we would all aspire to have?
I didn't know you were going to ask this question. I think the biggest thing for me, I've kind of touched on it earlier, is the fact that I'm sitting up here next to County Behavioral Health, the city attorney, we got CapSlow, the meetings I've been involved in over the last several years. This didn't happen. We weren't doing this before. We were dusting one problem to the next. Hey, cool, here you, behavioral health, deal with this guy. No collaboration after the fact. Hey, what can we do to work together for a longer term solution? We were patching things. We know now that that wasn't working very well. And so for all of us to be here in this room and be in meetings and work together and understand each other's challenges and struggles within the scope of the law and case law and all these other things we have to follow, and people's right to be homeless if they choose to, right? I mean, so they choose to be out of their house. There are people that are choosing to be homeless. Sorry, it wasn't a right. I'm just saying thank you, city attorney, for being here and giving me legal advice. I appreciate it.
Working together in action right here.
Cut off the mic, please. No, but I mean this is part of it, us heading in the right direction. And this, I'm actually super excited to be here and to have these partnerships and have these relationships to find this long-term solution.
Thank you, Frank.
There's a room full of people here on a Wednesday morning that are all passionate. And I mean, you look around your own rows. That's the reality. Is that this community knows when it needs to pull together. It's doing the work. So that's what gives me hope. The second piece of that is it doesn't stop just because people get to the table. We will need to continue doing this. I think I said in our discussions earlier that we actually have gotten to the table on things before. And I think Chief Tuggle is right. This is probably the most complex thing. I think this is more complex than COVID was, even though COVID brought a lot of us together. COVID itself was a virus that didn't have a soul and a heartbeat, right? And that's the difference here, is that this is human reaction that is matched to policy and governance. So we need these things to happen. We need to just kind of reaffirm. So I'll just say this too. Afterwards, if we weren't able to answer a specific question about our fields, we're all sticking around so we can have that engagement, because this is not just a one-way dialogue. It can't be if it's going to work. So I think that's the point of that.
Thanks, Frank. Christine.
I fundamentally am an optimist about the human strength and spirit and resilience and ability to come together and solve hard problems. I particularly believe that about this community because it's what I've experienced for the 25 years that I have lived here. It's why I chose to raise my children here. I have incredible faith in the people that I look out on in this audience to want to do the right thing for the right reasons and our ability to come together to do it. So thank you for your time, and thank you to the partners that are in this room, and for everybody who's taken the time to be thoughtful and submit questions and just participate in this tough one with us together as a community.
Thanks, Christine.
I'd agree with what was said. The people, this group of people, our team at CapSlow, we have amazing opportunity right now as a community. We have a county that has identified this as a challenge. We have a city who has a major city goal. We have leadership at the county now and a whole division to be able to pull people together. We even have state level leadership that wants to do something. I've joked for years in this field that July 1st, which is when our funding starts over, is Groundhog's Day, and we have to rebuild this thing over and over every year. You can't help people in crisis when you're in crisis. And we've tried to address homelessness while having a homeless service system that was in crisis. So we have a real opportunity to build something on a macro level that can address this human condition on a micro level very effectively and very efficiently. So I said earlier, I'm newer as a professional in this community, born and raised here, but I initially did beat my head against the wall of like, what are we doing? But then I get really, really excited about the opportunity we have to do something that's very special and potentially an example to the rest of the United States because of the people that are at the table and the people who are concerned, and the people ultimately who we're serving.
Linda.
I'm equally excited to be here at the table, and I am newer to this profession. I've been in social services 20 years, primarily in child welfare. Christmas Day, my boss called me and said, I want you to take over homeless services. And I thought, are you out of your mind? And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, why not, right? I love working with my community partners. We've done some incredible work. When you work at a systems level, you can solve problems. And one of the ways we do that is by changing the narrative. And I'm so excited for this conversation today because we're talking about our people. We're not looking at our individuals experiencing homelessness and saying, what's wrong with you? Because that's a pretty common question. What did they do wrong to become homelessness? And what that question is rooted in is fear. Because if it can happen to them, it can happen to me. And the reality is it can. Any one of us can be impacted by mental illness or substance use or experiencing homelessness. And I think it doesn't have to happen to me for me to care if it's happening in my community. And I'm really excited that we're shifting this narrative of people being resistant to services and really looking at they're not yet ready to engage, and how do we build a service that's going to get them ready to engage and then build that trust that they're going to feel confident to say yes, that we really are there to help them. So I'm really excited for the coming year.
Thanks, Linda. Chief Tuggle.
Yeah, I think what gets me up in the morning and what keeps me going is truly kind of pull two threads. One is what Lauren talked about the individuals, what Linda talked about the systems, is that the people that they're serving, the people that we're serving, are met with and worked with by a group of very talented field workers. And Margaret, had everybody raise their hand. And then we get to operate at the systems level. And so sandwiched in between the people we're serving and us at the systems level is this group of people that are working. And honestly, that's, in my opinion, that's what keeps me going each day, is trying to empower them to continue their compassionate work that they're doing day in and day out. So thank you for that. And trying to help them be successful. What are the barriers that you can get out of the way so that those folks each day can just let their hearts pour out and connect people with the resources they need? And that's the exciting thing here, is we get to work together towards that, and we're starting to see that collaboration come together. And I like Lauren's idea. Let's be the model. Let's be the model for other communities. Let's get out there and get after that. So yeah, that keeps me motivated.
Very good. Thank you. So that concludes the panel discussion. I'd like to thank all of you for your service to our community. And if we can give them a round of applause, we'll bring Daisy up to wrap up.
And just for your transparency and willingness to have these conversations. So I did want to highlight a few of our service providers that are here today in the lobby. Some of you already got to visit with them as you were arriving, but I just wanted to go over who's in the room so that if you have questions on any of these specific issues we've talked about today, or questions that weren't addressed, that you can chat with these folks. As is evidenced by our discussion and everything that was shared today, addressing homelessness is a collaborative effort, and we are incredibly grateful for the partners that we have in the city and with the county and our service providers that are, like everyone has mentioned today, really trying to come together to address this collaboratively. So if you have more questions, as Shannon shared earlier about the Clean and Safe program with Downtown SLO, they're here. SLO County's Behavioral Health and Homeless Services Division staff is here with information about the 2024 PIT count. People's Self-Help Housing, if you have questions about the Kiowa Home Key or any of their other projects. The Housing Authority of SLO, if you have questions about the Section 8 voucher process or any of their housing properties. Our city housing team is here if you have general kind of housing questions. CAPSLO and TEMA, Good Samaritan Shelter, if you have questions about any of their services and programs that they offer, as well as Shower the People, who offers a shower program for unhoused community members 4 days a week in the city of SLO. We're really grateful for their service, and they're here today. And we have several members of our homelessness response team, so our CAT team, our mobile crisis unit, rangers, and our community service officers. If you have any questions for our field staff about the work that they do in the field and some of the city's policies and processes. And John's mentioned several times, if your question wasn't answered today, or if you need to leave and aren't able to stay and chat with staff, please fill out one of the question cards. They're at the back table. And there's some out in the front also. We would love to be able to follow up with you with any contact information you provide, whether that's phone or email, and we can connect those questions to our other service providers if it would be better for them to address it versus city staff. And you can drop those in the basket or give them to me or another city staff member. And then I also just wanted to highlight for any ongoing issues, we do have an Ask SLO app at the city, and we really encourage community members to use that if there is an issue that needs to be addressed by city staff. So it isn't just specific to homelessness, but there are a few categories or topics on that app for homeless encampments, abandoned shopping carts, fire hazards, park maintenance, graffiti, reporting litter. It's really a way for the community to communicate to the city and our staff of areas or issues that need to be addressed. So if there's an emergency issue, please call 911 or the non-emergency number, as Christine mentioned, if police response is needed. But that app helps any of our staff. So whether it's park maintenance staff or my team or any of the departments of the city, those requests get routed to the appropriate department. So I encourage you to use that app. You can download it on your phone or use it online on a computer, but it's a good way to communicate issues and for our staff to be able to follow up with you directly. I also have my business cards here, and I'd be happy to stay and chat with anybody if you have questions, just general questions for the city. But otherwise, I really just want to thank you all for being here and for engaging in this conversation. Like we said earlier, this is one of many conversations that needs to happen, and we are just looking forward to ongoing dialogue. And if there are spaces that you think we should be having more conversations or doing follow-up conversations or feedback sessions, please let me know, and I'd love to help facilitate that or bring people together. So just again, thank you for being here. Have a wonderful day, and please stay and visit with all of our wonderful service providers. Thank you.